Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. My name is Summer Shah. I'm the country director of the British Council in Azerbaijan. So I'm talking to you from a very sunny and warm Baku today. And I'm also the regional higher education program director for the British Council's wider Europe region. So this is a region consists of 15 countries, and that is Western Balkans, Central Asia, South Caucasus, Ukraine, Israel, Turkey, and Russia. And this is the 7th session of the British Council's Higher Education Dialogue Deep Dive. This series follows the very successful original series that we launched in May last year and is a direct response to the challenges of COVID-19 for the education sector across my region, the UK, and the rest of the world. The Deep Dive series is aimed at addressing some very specific topics during the pandemic so that we can bring people together from all over the world, like today, so you can exchange ideas and give you, the audience, some tangible takeaways you can immediately apply to your working context. And today, we will be talking about Tvet, technical and vocational education and training. Now, COVID has brought serious disruptions to the education sector, and vocational education is not immune to that. In particular, work-based learning has been seriously affected due to the closure of many businesses. Since the start of the pandemic, Tvet providers had to shift to online delivery rapidly, which was not easy due to insufficient equipment, connectivity issues, lack of platforms, pedagogical resource, and lack of digital skills amongst the learners and teachers. So in today's session, we're going to explore some innovative strategies in Tvet in order to improve the resilience of skills training systems and the preparedness and enhance the Tvet pathway for learners. Our esteemed panel of speakers will also touch on sustainability offered by the Tvet sector, such as responding to future market needs of skilled labor, lifelong learning, green jobs that are automation proof. The key question we want all of you to address is the emerging new role for Tvet. How do national Tvet sectors have to change to support economies post-COVID-19? Now, to everyone who's watching, in addition to the panel, your input is equally important. So please use the chat room on the right-hand side and share your comments and questions along the way. The format of the session today will include a presentation from each of our panel members to start with. We will then break into 3 groups to have a discussion around some key questions so we could hear from your experience and come up with some solutions together. And those questions are posted in the chat room right now, so you can read them. They include: what can institutions do to raise the profile of Tvet and support learners during the pandemic? What can be done to strengthen links with the industry to increase employment prospects for Tvet students? And what policy changes are needed to better support Tvet coming out of the pandemic? And I'm sure you have been thinking about these questions in your own country, your own institution. So we will have a chance to hear your thoughts and come up with some solutions, hopefully for the benefits of the whole group. Now, before we kick off, just a reminder of our ground rules. If you're not invited to speak, please stay on mute and switch off your camera. Do use the chat function on the right-hand side. Share your comments and your questions, and like those that resonate with you, so we can tackle the most popular questions and comments. The session will last 90 minutes, and after the session, we will send you all the session recording, the slides used by our panel members, and a summary spotlight report. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dawn Ward, CBE. Dawn is Chief Executive and Principal of Burton and South Derbyshire College and Deputy Chair Europe for the World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics. She's also Deputy Chair of the Chartered Institute for Further Education. She has extensive experience in senior positions at board level. Dawn has received numerous awards throughout her extensive career in technical and professional education, including Principal of the Year from the Centre for Excellence in Leadership and Leadership in Race Equality Award from the Network for Black and Asian Professionals. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Summer. Camilla, if you could put the slides up, please. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be joining with you today, and I'm in the UK, so it's lovely to be here with you. And I'm going to look at how investment and leadership help the organisation that I lead thrive during the pandemic. Camilla, once you've got the slide up on full screen, could you then move to the second slide for me? Thank you. And I'm going to cover a few key topics, which are going to cover from digital infrastructure strategy, leadership considerations, the pedagogical approach, and then reflection. But before I start, I would like to just set the context for you. So Burton in South Derbyshire College is a further and higher education college that's set in the heart of England. It has a long history of working in partnership with industry. And in 2015, we set out our vision for 2028. And that served us really well in terms of being prepared for the challenges that the education sector faced through the pandemic. Next slide, please, Camilla. As part of our 2028 strategic plan, we invested in 2018 £1.6 million in our digital infrastructure strategy. And this included a solution for our teachers, a device that went with them everywhere. So each staff member had it, whether it was in the classroom, whether it was at home or their staff room. And this was about, for us, building device familiarity and confidence in its use, therefore getting the most out of the technology. We had a uniform delivery solution, supporting training and development and sharing good practice and innovation. We continue to use specialist hardware solutions such as iMacs within the classrooms and workshops where required, such as in areas as creative industries. And for us, it was about having flexible, compatible classroom workshop devices and removing the teaching from the front of the classroom by casting and creating a more learner-led delivery, which is less didactic. We then had a solution from this for learners that reduced barriers, ensuring accessibility and addressing device poverty, that tailored vocational applications such as CAD, SolidWorks, Sage, amongst others, and that removed the need for learners to purchase expensive applications to support their remote studies. And this was available 24/7 from any internet-enabled device, both on and off campus. It also ensured for us one single secure document storage location for all of our learners and staff. Next slide, please, Camilla. I want to now move to talk about pandemic leadership. The pandemic created great fear, so it was critical to quickly set up a clear and decisive direction for all staff and students. We moved swiftly from being on-site to off-site learning. This meant that making clear choices, even though we had limited information on what we were all facing from COVID, and therefore we had very little lead time. Above all, we needed to take people with us. So from a leadership focus, we set out to have and retain a number of things. And quite clearly, at forefront was clear and decisive communication. This had to be regularly updated. It had to be multi-channeled, so it was understood by all. We moved from a distributed leadership to command and control. I moved to regular video messaging to all of the staff, had daily meetings right across the organisation and debriefings that were disseminated up, down and around the organisation. And I met regularly with my chairman, my vice chairman and clerk, so that everyone was very clear each step of the way. As a leadership team, our learning strategy had to be adapted as we moved off-site. We needed a staged approach. It was important to put in building blocks, which allowed time to build our students and staff's digital skills. and we needed to be consistent in what we were doing. We had to ensure sufficient training, development and support for all of our staff, and it was important to make sure we celebrated all that they were achieving, as well as encouraging and inspiring staff to continually do more. We focused on a number of key things, including feedback. It was important to listen to feedback and respond, even if it was hard to take sometimes. This was a new way of working for staff and students, and it was important for staff and leaders to not be scared of changing the approach when it wasn't working. Quality assurance was key. Maintaining quality assurance during the pandemic was essential, setting clear expectations and standards for staff and learners. We needed consistency in all that we were doing, as it was important that we were confident in the delivery throughout the whole organisation. And above all, well-being and mental health came front and centre. Concern for the mental health of our staff and students and their wider families drove a number of approaches, such as our progress coaches producing videos to encourage students to connect and talk. We held social events online. We set up what we called our Tea at 3 and encouraged staff and students to join everyone and their families and share that on social media. We had welfare checks on staff and students. We took an empathetic approach and need everyone to have a play personal circumstances. And we looked at a variety of flexible approaches to working for as many people as possible, because we knew that we had staff who were having to do homeschooling or care for family and trying to work at the same time. So it was important to understand personal circumstances. Next slide, please, Camilla. I'd like to share with you now our pedagogical approach, or our teaching and learning strategy throughout the pandemic. As I said earlier, we moved swiftly from on-site to off-site. So we established this through a number of stages. The first stage was about adjustment and familiarisation, giving clear and timely guidance, setting clear expectations, thus setting a standardisation approach. We needed students and staff to adjust to working from home. So our initial delivery was more asynchronous, passive learning with content on our virtual learning environment, Canvas. Our delivery was not fixed, but self-serving to suit the period of disruption and national change. We had to resolve device and connectivity issues for students. We didn't need specific or specialist devices given our investment in virtual desktop. We used redeployment of our existing hardware to support learners who didn't have devices. We had iPads and laptops that we shared, and this was quick and effective. In this phase, we established effective communication channels for learners and staff, such as setting up email inquiries and systems to triage and cope with a significant increase in digital inquiries by putting in simple, effective escalation systems. And we built in welfare checks for students and staff. Our second stage was about skills and confidence building, thus giving clear and timely guidance to everyone, setting clear expectations to ensure standardisation. It was about refinement of our learning content, and this was based on our medium to longer term approach, given the extended lockdown. A key element was sharing good practice set alongside staged training and development sessions for all of our staff. In this phase, we introduced the live delivery sessions. We established quality performance parameters with development via our teaching, learning and assessment coaches and developing an online performance rubric. And we began doing developmental thematic learning walks. Our third stage, creativity and innovation, was about giving clear and timely guidance again and setting clear expectations for standardisation. And that was a continual theme throughout all of our stages. We now had higher volumes of synchronous active learning, full timetables alongside project-based learning. We had more staff training and development at intermediate and advanced levels, and we were conducting formal teaching, learning and assessment reviews online. And above all, we were encouraging creativity and innovation. Next slide, please, Camilla. We then moved into creativity and innovation. So what was wonderful to see, and it was amazing for me because I joined many, observed many online classes, was there was huge examples of creativity and innovation, you know, from creative subjects who use virtual galleries and showcases, to the performing arts who did virtual pantomimes and dance lessons, hospitality who were doing cook along at home, our engineering staff who'd taken home their remote 3D printers in order to be able to get the students' work printed and have discussions. Hair and beauty were using block work, and they were doing virtual treatment demonstrations and working on sort of family that were with them at home. There was inspirational career talks and showcases. So we had the Formula One engineer talk to our engineering students and live welding demonstrations. I could go on about the amazing things that I saw and how industry pulled together to support the education sector, because Tvet is really, really important to them. Next slide, please, Camilla. So we're now at the stage in terms of reflection and refocusing. And the things that we're talking through and working through is, you know, how do we use the digital advancements that we've gained going forward? How does this change our curriculum planning now moving forward? It's about building bridges and knowledge gaps, because we've got many young people that have left school who have missed quite a huge gap in their education. And for us as a country, it's about building back better. What we have seen quite clearly is the recognition by our government in Tvet. They recognise Tvet is a very important part that they need to drive the UK economy forward. Thank you. Thank you, Summer.
Thank you very much, Dawn, for that presentation and bringing that institutional perspective. I think there is so much there. I hope, you know, others are taking notes as I do. I mean, in particular, I was really struck by the attention given to well-being, you know, for your staff and your students, and the amount of creativity and innovation that has come out of the challenging period. And that actually, I think, has triggered one question already in the chat room. So I want to pose that question to you, Dawn, if I may. So it came from Andrew Hall. Looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on this topic. Without minimizing the really horrible consequences of the pandemic, the crisis has actually provided the impetus to achieve longer-term goals that would not otherwise have happened, such as the digital transformation of learning or greater focus on mental health. Would these things have happened anyway?
I think it's a really good question to have posed. I think I set out that we had a vision for 2028. What it's done for us is accelerated it, and I think it's brought everybody up to the same place. So I think for many people it has instigated that change. For organisations like my own, we were on that path, that hence we've made quite a significant investment before. But it's really good to see that we're now all able to offer that. I know that we used to have a lot of international students that came to the college, and we're now delivering online to them. You know, we had to develop special packages. So I think it has brought a level playing field, I think, across the world. Because when I talk at World Federation, I'm hearing the same from colleagues around the world. What we've got to do now is really take it to the next step.
Absolutely, and I'm sure other speakers will probably touch on that point as well. The other thing you mentioned, Dawn, is towards the end, how the pandemic has actually made the UK government recognise the important role Tvet plays, and that's actually one of the questions we asked the audience in our poll as well. So I want to take this opportunity to first of all thank everybody for your input, and I want to show the results from our poll, and which I hope can be seen by all now. So just refresh it to make sure the last input has been captured. So interestingly, we also asked to what degree has the pandemic raised the profile of Tvet in your country? I think it's half-half. So half of the people say it is better recognized now, and the other half, the same as before. A very small percentage has said, well, it's actually worse than before. That is a bit of surprise, but we can, you know, look into the reasons behind that in a moment. And then moving forward, what are the priorities your institution and country will focus on in Tvet? So the top answers are capacity building for the educators in the sector, changing people's mindset about Tvet, and better technology to support online delivery, improving related policy, and closer collaboration with businesses. Now, Dawn, I want to ask, are these the priorities you'll be looking at your institution as well?
I think they're probably fair to say. I mean, in terms of the technology side, we're certainly trying to make sure we keep ahead of the game in where technology is going and changes that are coming through. Mindset, I have to say, the staff shifted in the organisation, their mindset, and the board, the mindset has moved in the direction anyway. I think the capacity building is really important because we always have new people coming in. And I think the other part for me is about collaboration. So capacity building through collaboration, because what we want to do is to make sure that we can share. If we can all share all these resources that we've developed, what a great thing to do. Because it will save time and money for all of us and build upon that. So I think those are really important aspects.
Absolutely, Dawn. And I mean, collaboration is one of the reasons why we are organizing the session today, so that we can collaborate, put our heads together from all over the world, and then see how we can come up with creative and innovative solutions to the common problems that we all face. Now, I think one of the answers is also about improving related policies. So that actually is a good point for us to move on to our second speaker, who can talk about the policy and what policy changes she has seen from the Association of Colleges. So without further ado, I will invite our next speaker, and that is Emma Meredith, the International Director of the Association of Colleges, AOC. Emma leads on international policy at AOC, representing and supporting the college sector on the national level to develop opportunities for international engagement. Emma has 20 years experience working in higher education, further education, and both public and private education. She graduated in modern languages from the University of Cambridge. Now over to you, Emma.
Thanks very much, Summer, for that introduction and for inviting me to be here today to talk with participants from so many different countries and sectors. Just to explain what the AOC is, if we could just skip back a slide, we're the national representative body for colleges in England, so we work very closely with the government in England, helping to shape education policy, Tvet policy, and our membership is comprised of publicly funded colleges of education and specialist education, so technical colleges in England. And today's very timely actually to take part in this session because the AOC has been conducting some research for the British Council about how institutions, Tvet institutions, are changing as a result of the pandemic. So it's very interesting for me today to hear from the people taking part about what's been happening in your countries, because as part of this research, we've looked at policy, practice and emerging themes in 5 specific countries. So if we just move to the first slide, the first thing I'd like to talk about is this question about the role of the Tvet sector and whether it's enhanced post-COVID. So it's very interesting to see the results of the poll just now, that's an almost 50-50 split between no change for the role of Tvet and perhaps an improved profile for Tvet. And certainly at AOC, we're part of a European network. We're part of a bigger global network of Tvet institutions that Dawn alluded to, called the World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics. And I think throughout the pandemic, whilst all of the different institutions have different contexts, they work in different countries, many similar themes have emerged throughout the pandemic, and some of those I'll touch on during my presentation slot today. But in terms of how we can look at the rising profile of Tvet or measure whether actually it is rising as a result of its response to COVID, I think there's a couple of areas that we can look at to address that question. And first of all is the issue of collaboration. So how have Tvet institutions worked within their communities to form connections, to support students and the local community, in addition to aligning with perhaps the national health and economic priorities that we've seen during the pandemic? So certainly in the UK, we have examples of colleges that have turned their campuses into COVID testing centres, or they've produced PPE or other materials to actually support the health emergency response to the pandemic. So they've really been playing their role on a local level and within their communities to support how we can get through the pandemic quickly. And I think this links in as well to the role of employers and the engagement that colleges and Tvet institutions have with employers, and perhaps how we've seen apprentices during the pandemic, how colleges and institutes have tried to keep the engagement with employers strong and make sure that work-based learning has been protected as much as it can be whilst there's been so much disruption from the pandemic. The theme of innovation, Dawn's touched on this already, is a very big one from the pandemic. So how institutions have adopted new digital practice, how they've adapted it, and whether they're going to actually mainstream that into their provision as a result of the pandemic and more longer term innovation. So again, that's another aspect I think that perhaps has helped to raise the profile of Tvet. Perhaps in fact through digital means a greater audience can be reached, more students, more employers, more people coming to a Tvet institution because they're able to do that digitally. And also I think we've certainly seen, and again Dawn touched on this very clearly, the resilience, the resistance of staff, their commitment within Tvet institutions and how they've lended their expertise to the success of the organisations and its communities working their way through the pandemic. And again, I think many institutions on this call probably had to respond incredibly quickly and flexibly to the pandemic and the changes that it brought about. So I think the Tvet sector has certainly shown that at an individual institution level and at a system level, it can respond very quickly and very flexibly to emergency situations, which really leads me as an advocate for the sector to say that I do think it really is time, if we've not done so already, we do need to acknowledge the role of Tvet in delivering 21st century skills. Next slide, please. So I have two more slides to cover, and I just want to put out some higher level considerations, first for Tvet practitioners and secondly for Tvet policymakers, which I'd look to pick up in the breakout session that follows these initial presentations. So when we're looking at the future of Tvet and how it can respond to labour market changes and how it can evolve, these are some of the considerations I think that at an institution level are important to look at. The first is around digital, around educational technology, but looking at how it can be used sustainably in the curriculum, particularly for vocational and work-based learning subjects, because I'm not sure that we've entirely managed to find ways to replicate some of those, if you like, very technical or hands-on based subjects in a fully virtual way. The second point relates to staff. Dawn mentioned some of the training that her institution's done for and put on for staff. And I think institutions need to think about the digital training, not only that they've offered during the pandemic or what they're offering now, but what does a CPD plan look like for the next 6 months, for the next year and into the future, so that staff can stay on top of their digital skills. Students, they're the reason that Tvet exists, to support students, to give them the education and training to get jobs or to progress onwards into other forms of education. How are we going to continue to support students and look at some of the perhaps the mental health or other support issues that have arisen because of the pandemic, and that even when we get through this period won't necessarily go away. So I think there's a whole aspect to look at an institutional level around student support. There's also a big issue emerging around lost learning, how much students have missed because of the pandemic. And recently, my organisation, the AOC, we published a report around catch-up, showing that around 3/4 of 16 to 18-year-olds are performing below normal expectations, and they are in fact several months behind. So we've used that paper to make several policy recommendations to our government about how to fix this problem, because where we're going to end up is a position perhaps of consecutive years or cohorts of students who could fall into a position where they have experienced lost learning and they're constantly trying to catch up. For institutions as well, the relationship with employers is going to remain critical in determining what you offer at a curriculum level, what kind of work-based employment opportunities and experience opportunities that you can offer. And that would be on a local level, but perhaps more regional and national as well, as perhaps national labour market priorities shift in response to the pandemic. Another key question for institutions is whether you have the right data at your organisation to make some of the decisions that you'll need to make to see you out through the pandemic, and how you're accessing that data as well and making it available to support your decision making. And the final point on practitioners is really around how you work as an institution with other similar institutions. Do you have a network that you're able to develop with your peers so that you can share best practice? Because I think certainly working virtually as we are today, this is a great opportunity to share best practice amongst institutions. And I think that's often the way in which institutions can develop new ideas, by feeding off each other and by talking to others. Next slide, please. And my final slide is just really looking at some, again, high-level considerations for Tvet policymakers. The first one, which I think has come up quite a lot, certainly during the research that we've been doing with the British Council, is local versus national control over decision making. And by this, I mean, whether it's a COVID policy or an education policy, who has control over that? Is it something that's coming through at a national level that's going to filter down? Or are they decisions that are able to be made at a local level so that institutions can perhaps best tailor that decision making to their individual situation? Another one, which is sort of embedded into the different Tvet systems around the world, is the speed and flexibility of response to changing labour market and curriculum demands. So basically, how quickly can your national system respond to some of these changes and put in the right measures that you're going to need for the next year, 5 years and 10 years. Finance is always an issue, and certainly something that at AOC we do a lot of work around is looking at stable investment in Tvet for long-term security. And as part of that, I think it's very important that policymakers consider the cost of COVID-19. It's cost everybody something, the pandemic. I mean, there's very, very little good to come out of it. But institutions have absorbed a lot of new costs. Perhaps it's making the campus secure and clean and safe for learners to come back in. So if your Tvet system's looking perhaps to bring in new reforms or bring in new measures that institutions need to adopt, there's a key question there of how much is that going to cost and is it actually affordable? The next question, this is one of the sort of $1 million question really, is technology delivering all the answers? Will it deliver all the answers? And in the next presentation, we're going to hear from colleagues from Jisc who are experts in looking at the digital question. And I think for policymakers as well, related to digital, it's how we can make sure that future student cohorts are not left behind from what's already been a very difficult pandemic situation. We have students who are left behind, we have those who are in the system already, and then the future cohorts to come. And we need to tailor the policy response to these different categories of students. And this leads to the next theme, which is making sure that the student body is fully included. There will be more students who are disadvantaged or disconnected by COVID-19, perhaps those in rural areas. To some degree, it can be argued perhaps female learners have not had the same opportunities as their male counterparts through the pandemic. And we need to make sure that there's a degree of equity and equality in how policy targets, Tvet policy targets institutions and learners. And the final point goes back to collaboration, which I think Dawn ended her presentation with. So this is an interesting one to discuss today, is whether the system, the Tvet system, can be used to create different or new kinds of collaborations from within itself to help support the response of the sector and policymakers through the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That's brilliant. I think, it has given us so much to think about, and I particularly like, the different considerations for the practitioners and the policymakers, as we have quite a mixed crowd today. And of course, the important point you talked about, how to protect the work-based learning, the engagement with the employer, lots of institutions that are struggling with, and the role of Tvet in developing those needed 21st century skills for the future generation. I wonder, before we move on to the next two speakers, I wonder if I can just ask a follow-up question on this intra-system collaboration. I'm thinking more internationally, given that we have a very international crowd today. I think our participants come from 15 to 20 countries in my region and other parts of the world. Do you think the pandemic has also given us an opportunity to look beyond our domestic partners in that peer network and think more about how we can share experience and learn from each other internationally?
I think it has, certainly in my experience, it has, for example, through AOC's international collaboration and our work with yourselves and the British Council. I think certainly the British Council is a great vehicle to facilitate that international cooperation and bring institutions together. I mentioned some research that I looked at with the British Council, and that actually did bring practitioners together in a number of focus groups that were extremely valuable, I think. So I think there's definitely been the opportunity for that through the pandemic. I think we need to make sure that perhaps institutions that have had less of a chance to do that kind of engagement are given that opportunity. So perhaps today is a good vehicle again to facilitate those discussions in the breakout groups that will follow.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Emma. And well, on your last slide, I think you raised a really good question for our next two speakers. Is technology delivering all the answers? So I hope our next two speakers from Jisc, Paul McKean and Alison Nicholson, will be able to answer that question. So Paul McKean is the Head of Further Education and Skills at Jisc, and he provides Jisc with strategic direction around its work in further education and skills. Paul works with colleagues across Jisc, funders from the 4 nations, sector bodies and learning providers to ensure Jisc helps its members and their staff utilize technology so they can meet the needs of the variety of learners and employers the further education and skills sector support. Alison Nicholson, who is the head of Jisc Wales, has the responsibility to ensure outstanding service for Jisc members and communities in Wales. She joined Jisc in 2018 as an e-learning advisor, and in 2010 she was appointed to the role of service level management before becoming the head of service in 2014. Prior to Jisc, Alison spent 10 years working in the further education and skills sector, teaching IT to learners from work-based learning, adult and community learning, further education and higher education. So now I'll hand over to Paul and Alison.
Many thanks, Emma. Great to see everyone. Great to be here. We've practiced this really well. Paul, are you kicking off?
Yeah, I will. Thanks very much, Alison. So thanks, Summer, and thanks everybody for joining us and giving us the opportunity to share UK learning around the use of technology since the pandemic hit our shores in the UK in March last year. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Jisc. Jisc, for everyone's benefit, is a social enterprise in the UK, and we run the UK's National Research and Education Network, which supports Tvet, HE and research. We support the tertiary education sectors across the UK with their connectivity, cybersecurity, as well as centralised negotiated access to digital content, software and expert advice and guidance to support technology and enhance learning. In our short presentation, Alison and I will be reflecting on research projects that just carried out across the Tvet and HE sectors across the UK in June and July last year, the recommendations from that research for our funders, so the UK governments, and how Jisc has worked with the Welsh Government and the Welsh Tvet sector to create a Wales Digital 2030 strategic framework. So I will move on. If we can move on, please, Camilla, to the next slide. So what I'd like to do is to provide you with an overview of the research findings. And as you'll know positively, a number of the areas I will touch upon on this slide were identified by Dawn as either areas her institution have already addressed or are currently addressing through her current vision and strategy. The first area I wanted to touch upon, because sadly not every institution is in the position of having the foresight that Dawn has within her institution, and digital exclusion has actually become wider in the Tvet sense across the UK during the pandemic, because not all learners have had the opportunity to have access to digital devices and or connectivity, and critically actually safe places to learn. So even though they may have had access to a device or connectivity when they were having to learn at home or in different environments, they didn't have a safe place to do so. So digital exclusion has actually been exacerbated, and it's great that colleges such as Dawn's have put positions in place to make sure everybody has that equality of access, and that's something that certainly we recommend as a part of the research outcomes. Another area is around learner well-being. That is very much around the skill sets that learners need, and the increased anxieties quite often that online and independent learning has provided to learners, where they've been given, if you like, overwhelming amounts of either synchronous or asynchronous delivery, and not have the support in place to be able to cover that particular learning in appropriate fashion, particularly when they've been used to learning very much in a face-to-face environment. Switching that on its head and being expected to learn differently has created anxieties within learners, and where appropriate support, again, as Dawn has put in place in her institution, has really helped reduce the factors of anxieties within learners. The next area is around staff capabilities and confidence. There's clearly a mix of staff's digital confidence and competence, with the majority of practitioners requiring support with digital pedagogy. So even though pre-COVID, many staff within the Tvet sector were using technology with their learners, it was quite often for what you may class as homework or assignment activities, for collecting assessment and distributing work, but not for delivery of teaching and learning. And there's definitely a need for additional support for staff, particularly around, as I say, the digital pedagogy space. And moving on, very connected to that, the quality of provision, again, an area identified by Dawn within her slides. The importance of good digital pedagogy is critical to keep that quality of provision. Learners are used to a really great face-to-face experience by really professional and experienced tutors who are used to delivering that manner. Staff themselves have identified concern that they don't feel they have the quality content and skill set to deliver a equal and appropriate online delivery as they do in a face-to-face environment, where they have all the tools in the workshop and environments that they would normally have to hand. And a lot of that is related to the content that they have access to. The next area is around assessment and feedback. Formative assessment can be done really effectively in an online and blended way, but equally it can exacerbate the anxieties I mentioned earlier on around learner well-being, where feedback isn't provided in a timely manner. One of the major comments that we got back from learners who were engaged in this research is they classified themselves as the kind of Snapchat generation. They expect instant gratification from technology. So when they send any kind of assignment or work in, they expect assessment feedback pretty much immediately. That isn't possible, as we all know, given the workload of staff. So it's just really critical that learners are provided with the kind of understanding of when and where feedback will be provided, and not to be disconcerted if they're not given that instant response. The next area is around digital curriculum, and as we know, the whole of the world has been impacted by COVID, and lots of sectors have been impacted by technology, and actually the transformation around digital has really accelerated within all of the different employers and sectors, and therefore it's really critical that the curriculum within Tvet matches the changing needs of employers. So where, for example, in the UK, around the hospitality industry, lots of technologies are now kind of second to none in their use, from apps to book tables and order things in restaurants and so forth. It's really critical that learners are provided with the skill sets that they will need in, if you like, in the new working environment. And then finally, two really big areas that were identified from the research: the importance of digital leadership. And again, I'm going to refer back to Dawn. Unfortunately, not all colleges had the technological and digital vision and strategy in place, as Dawn had within her institution at the outset of the pandemic. And they've really needed to understand what process and what priority to do things, from providing access to equipment and addressing that digital exclusion positions, having the right platforms in place, the right staff skills and so on. So digital leadership is a really key area that still needs development, and the kind of work that Dawn is doing it's great to really shine a light on that so other organisations can replicate it. And then finally, sector reform. There is a real need to take advantage of the opportunities and affordances that technology provides, particularly in the sort of assessment and delivery space. And that means that there needs to be thoughts and changes to maybe the funding and audit regime and the way in which this is managed within government. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Camilla. So again, I'm not going to go into the full detail of all of these recommendations for government, but I just wanted to give the audience today a kind of an overriding glance of the kind of things that were recognised as an issue. As I've just mentioned, the change to sector reform, the need to be able to fund planned learning hours. So in order for delivery not necessarily need to be face-to-face, but for it to be able to be blended or online is important. The reality that the initial teacher training programs that we have in the UK don't really include digital delivery and digital pedagogy, and that means that they do need to be enhanced and updated. The funding models around sort of micro-credentials, given the fact that learners are now more likely to upskill and reskill as they go through life, so really a truly lifelong learning agenda, and the funding models need to support that. Really critical, and again this has been referenced by both previous speakers, Emma and Dawn, that it's important to share best practice and to understand what good looks like. We need to support innovation. We need to provide funding for the kinds of digital infrastructure that Dawn and others have alluded to. If we move on to my final slide for now, please, Camilla. Thank you. Ensuring training and equipment is supported for individual staff, with the acknowledgement actually that there will be differentiated skill sets of staff. What's been very clear within the research is what you may class as a grade 1 or an excellent practitioner in a face-to-face environment isn't naturally a grade 1 or advanced practitioner in the online environment, and it's quite important to make sure that appropriate upskilling is provided to staff who traditionally don't need that much upskilling, but this is a completely different mode of delivery, so it's really important that the funding and time is made available for staff in that space. The need to fund digital creation for priority subjects. The definition here really is in the UK we've recognised, and again Emma alluded to this, as the kind of the lost learning, particularly in Tvet and practical subjects. There isn't enough digital virtual content, good quality content out there that can really be utilised to support and enhance the delivery in this space. So there really needs to be investment in that space, and again this will help if it's done centrally to share the workload, if you like, and the cost across the whole sector. And again, similarly, to fund a central FE and skills or Tvet content search and discovery platform to take the workload away from the practitioner and to, if you like, push content to them that is relevant to their particular sector area. And then the final two there are around providing funding for devices and connectivity, so no learner is disadvantaged. As I said, not every college is currently in the position of providing one-to-one connectivity and devices for learners, but it's a critical component if learners are not to be even more severely disadvantaged than they currently are. And finally, being able to take advantage of the opportunities and affordances that digital can provide to assessment. We recognise in the UK we've gone to teacher assessed grades for the last year and this year, but there are real opportunities that technology can provide to support that kind of ongoing assessment, and being really confident that that is validated and efficient, effective methodologies. I'll now hand over to Alison, who's going to talk more about strategic work with Welsh Government and our support and work with Wales.
Many thanks, Paul. I'd just like to introduce you to the Digital 2030 strategic framework, or in another way that I call it, it was actually a crowdsourced framework. Digital 2030 grew out of a discussion between post-16 education providers in Wales and the Welsh Government, about how to balance compliance with digital innovation. Indeed, what was effective digital practice? How could we ensure parity of experience and opportunity for learners, no matter the type of their course or their learning setting, etc.? So work started in 2018 when Welsh Government funded Jisc to work with colleges, work-based learning providers and adult community learning providers to define the scope, to build the framework and to collate supporting resources. I've shared in the chat pane a link to the actual framework itself and to the tool that Jisc created, which has those resources built in as well. Why did I say a crowdsourced strategy? Well, we embarked on a comprehensive sector-wide consultation using a digital perception survey that incorporated a whole raft of themes, looking at confidence, capability, student support, accessibility, leadership, infrastructure, and more. 217 staff participated in the gathering of evidence, 87 students, and we had 9 inspection reports as well. The framework was created by drawing on expertise from the sector. So building on those findings, we had a series of workshops, leaders and managers, delivery staff, infrastructure. Importantly, in the context of today's discussion, also a whole workshop around involving employer and community engagement. That then sort of all together with the evidence that we'd collated, we came up with a clear shared national vision, aims and objectives that were relevant to the organisation, but also could be owned across the organisation. For example, who better to understand leadership than leaders, who better to understand that community engagement and employer engagement than the staff who engage in that arena. The objectives then benefited from 189 peer reviews across all providers in Wales. And as I said, the result being a framework that is owned by, and in the words of the sector bodies, the Inspectorate and Welsh Government. That shared vision reads that post-16 learning providers will seamlessly integrate digital technology into delivery and encourage innovation in using inclusive, accessible and bilingual approaches to enhance the learner's experience. Based on an awareness of the digital skills needed to support the Welsh economy, providers will equip learners and staff with the digital capabilities and confidence they will need to succeed in everyday life and in work. Now, the framework was published in 2019 and provides the bedrock for growing digital practice across the post-16 sector in Wales. That's colleges, work-based learning providers and adult community learning providers. In 2020, we grew the framework to incorporate digital teaching and learning standards. And we've worked with the sector to explore and articulate levels of digital poverty, something that Paul referred to earlier on, and that work resulted in some significant capital investment for the sector. We've developed a digital pedagogy unit of accreditation, so a course that was crafted teaching active learning, so how to actually sort of do that online inspiring learning as opposed to simply replacing face-to-face learning in an online environment. And to date, 80% of the Work-Based Learning Commission contract holders in Wales have benefited from the course, and over 50% of the adult learning sector. And we continue to work with Welsh Government on the Wales Blended Learning Group as a partner and a facilitator of change. If we could just move on, I think it's the final slide next. We've got a list of key resources here. I'll make sure that we drop those into the chat pane for you so that you can actually sort of get to the links, and I'm sure in our breakout session we'll discuss those as well. So I think that's our final slide.
That's great.
Just some contact.
Well, yeah, so those are the contact details. Thank you, Alison and Paul. So to everyone who's watching, we will send the slides to you as promised after the session. So all these links Alison and Paul have made reference to will be made available to you as well. Well, thank you both. I think that's a really comprehensive answer to the question, is technology delivering all the answers? Well, maybe not all the answers, but certainly quite a long list of answers. And I think it really responds well to the priorities that our audience have mentioned in terms of capacity building, in terms of resolving the issues around technology and digitalization. So thank you once again, Alison and Paul, for that really informative and useful presentation. Now, everyone, the really even more fun part begins, because we're going to break you into groups for some further discussion so that you'll have a chance to discuss the policy level changes, the collaboration with the business, and also the role of institutions in raising the profile of Tvet in your country with our speakers. So I just posted the questions again. So now my colleague Nicola will break us up into 3 groups. Some of you will stay in this room with me and Dawn, and others will be taken into a breakout room with Emma, Alison, and Paul, and some other colleagues of mine. So you have about 25 minutes, and we'll bring you back closer to the time. Have a good discussion. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a good conversation. I mean, we certainly went on a world tour in our room, didn't we, Dawn? So we went to Nigeria, South Africa, Georgia, and Northern Ireland. So I would like to invite our main speakers to give us, in 1 minute, the key highlights from your discussion. And if I can come to Alison and Paul first.
Yeah, we had a really interesting discussion and went maybe not around the world in terms of nations, but certainly in terms of issues and solutions. We talked about education policies and economic prosperity needing to be akin. We talked at length really about the fact that courses and qualifications need to reflect the needs of industry, and that is probably best done by having very early relationships with industry, but also having regular reviews, not waiting 5-6 years to review a qualification, but maybe reviewing, maybe annually is too often, but having those frequent reviews with the engagement with industry to ensure that the qualifications remain current, and that our learners are equipped for success and therefore economic prosperity beyond that. We talked about much more than that, but within a minute, that's probably the headline.
That's excellent. Alison, anything to add to that, Paul?
I think that the real opportunities and affordances actually that the pandemic has provided. One of the latter points we raised was, this is normalised now, Teams meetings, lots of people from all around the world getting together and having conversations. What we possibly struggled with before was to get the time from employers to come and engage with learners. I think now we can simply approach them and they, oh yeah, we can drop in half an hour and have a conversation about what it means to be an engineer in this environment, what it needs to be a medic in this environment. So I think let's remember now, this is normalised, take advantage of that opportunity, and let's engage more thoroughly with employers, and not just chief executives, but more operational staff on the ground, the types of jobs that learners are going to go into.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. And coming over to you, Emma.
Hi, well, we had a really interesting discussion between Kazakhstan and England, actually, focusing on 2 main areas. The first was, and they're policy areas in the main, as per the brief for our group. The first one was really around, I think, teacher training and the adoption of digitalisation within the curriculum and teacher skills. So we discussed whether there should be any sort of minimum standard, really, that teaching staff should be required to have, the idea of sort of any sort of formal accreditation of teaching skills and digital teaching skills. So we had a good discussion around that and institutional-based CPD. And then the other thing we looked at really was the profile of the Tvet institutions, the Tvet sector, and whether this had seen any change because of the pandemic. And we actually moved on to sort of more long-standing general issues around, if you like, the perception of Tvet as being the second choice to higher education, and what we can do to change that, and selling the benefits of Tvet much more broadly. And as part of that, we looked at actually attracting staff into the Tvet teaching profession.
Excellent. Thank you, Emma. So I think those points about, teacher training, profile of Tvet, and, they keep coming up. And I think we have a real opportunity now to, bank on what the pandemic actually has stimulated. So I hope we can all do that. And last but certainly not the least, Dawn.
Thank you, Summer. As you know from being in the room, there was a couple of key things that came up from a variety of countries, particularly around funding, challenges of governments having funding due to the pandemic at the moment, and the positioning, as Emma's touched on, against traditional to academia, but against, if you like, the brief that we set about what can we do. Quite clearly, we talked about industry being used as a voice to promote Tvet. talked about Tvet, which really drives the economy and being the bloodline for all countries of what they need to do. And we then touched on the skills competitions and how skills, if you look at world skills competitions, how that could really influence, if we can get a minister from any country to go and touch and feel and experience and see what it's about, it can make a huge difference in promoting it. And equally, on the other side of it, how it can inspire students, where in certain countries they're trying to get them back into Tvet to actually study, how that could be used as a vehicle to raise it. And I'd just like to thank all of them that were in the room with us summer for their passion and commitment, not only they were showing for their country, but for the students and for the future of their country. So thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. I can't agree more. I think it is through, the engagement with the industry, with the students, we can really inspire and change people's perceptions about Tvet and truly raise its profile in our country and, region. Great, colleagues. I'm afraid we're coming towards the end of the session. So, panel members, if I could ask you one last question, well, the question we set out at the beginning of the session, having heard all these different perspectives from all over the world, if you could suggest one change the TV sector in a nation has to make to support economies post-COVID-19, what would that be? Can I go then the other order at the beginning? So Dawn, Emma, and then Alison and Paul. Dawn.
I'm going to come at it from collaboration from an institution point of view, because I think there's a lot we can give to each other, that we can learn from each other, and we can share, and we can connect our students and industries, because many companies we work with are multinational. So I think there's a huge opportunity of collaboration that could really change the face of the world for us on Tvet.
Thank you, Dawn. Emma?
I think probably something around the sort of national policy messaging of the Tvet sector, again, going back to this theme of raising the profile of the sector, but I think really showcasing what the Tvet sector can do, why you should study at a Tvet institution, why you should work in a Tvet institution, and why you should work with a Tvet institution. So I think bringing it back to that issue of the profile of Tvet, because I think really is the time that we need to promote the sector.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emma. Paul?
Yeah, I'd like to blend them two together if I could. I think it really is about collaboration, what opportunity to shine the light on the Tvet sector and what we do. And to add the third point is to use technology to do that. The last comment that I made is there is real opportunity now for global connections because of the technologies that we are now using on a day-to-day basis. So there's no real excuse for not being able to shine the light on all of the work that we do, and it not just to be national but to be international, because if we can work at a global scale, the economies of scale are going to be fantastic.
Thank you, Paul. Alison?
I saw a cracking, very, very good infographic about 3 or 4 years ago that was produced by the National Training Federation for Wales, and it was all really designed on debunking the myth that Tvet was second class compared to academic qualifications. And there was a flow chart of your potential earnings, but not just your earnings potential, your qualifications and your status within the community. And those people who did quality apprenticeships were coming out hands down better in terms of employability, in terms of lifelong employability skills, and in terms of earnings than their counterparts who maybe had gone down a more general higher education route. There are exceptions on both ends, so we've got to be a bit careful not to generalize that it's a one size fits all. But I suppose my recommendation would be information, trying to give people that balanced information, and that this is a real opportunity, mixed along with what everyone else has already said.
Thank you, Alison. So I think, well, you've heard it all, colleagues. So let's take this opportunity to stay connected globally, collaborate, and showcase that what we can do and really enhance that profile of Tvet. And I have every confidence that we can do that by working together. So thank you to all my panel members, Dawn, Emma, Alison and Paul, and everyone online who has joined us and sharing your experience with your input, and all my colleagues from the British Council for making it possible. We will share the session recording, the slides and other resources with you, as well as a spotlight report on the key discussion points from today's session. And we look forward to seeing you all again on another British Council dialogue in the near future. For the moment, stay safe and bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.